It's good to have you join me on the news. The headline says China connected to Australia's corruption case. In France, protesters killing of 17-year-old. China-Russia ties still strong after Wagner revolt. Report says General Surovikin blamed for Wagner mutiny and Solomon Islands seeks security reform. Stay with me for these and more stories. Talking political issues, a probe that examined business dealings with China has found the ex-premier of Australia's most populous state engaged in corrupt conduct involving another lawmaker with whom she was in a secret romantic relationship. In a report, the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption, ICAC, said it had handed to Parliament that Gladys Berejiklian had failed to notify the Commission of her concerns that Daryl Maguire, a member of Parliament with whom she was in a relationship during her term of office, may have engaged in corrupt conduct and thus undermined the ministerial code. As NSW Premier in 2020, Berejiklian, once a star of the right-wing Liberal Party and widely respected for her leadership during the COVID-19 pandemic, told the Corruption Review she had been in a secret, close personal relationship with Maguire, who was under investigation for monetizing his position through business dealings with China. She resigned a year later when the watchdog said it was probing whether she was involved in conduct that constituted or involved a breach of public trust. Berejiklian has denied any wrongdoing. Maguire told the inquiry he had received envelopes full of thousands of dollars in cash at his Parliament office as part of a scheme for Chinese nationals to fraudulently acquire visas. The Commission found Maguire engaged in serious corrupt conduct between 2012 and 2018 for the migration scheme and other misconduct. It said he misused his role as chairman of the NSW Parliament's Asia-Pacific Friendship Group to advance the commercial interest of a Shenzhen Business Association in South Pacific nations. He was also found to have monetized his position as a lawmaker to benefit a company, G8way, which sought to sell access to high levels of government in Australia. G8way's man in Beijing was a former vice consul in Sydney, it said. Maguire also misused his office by receiving a fee to introduce the party secretary of Liaoning province in China to then NSW Premier Barry O'Farrell at Parliament in 2012. It said Maguire already faces a criminal charge for his role in the visa scheme, for which he has not yet entered a plea in court. His lawyer said in a statement the Commission was not authorized to make findings that a criminal offence had been committed. The Commission said it will pursue advice from the Director of Public Prosecutions on whether further prosecutions should be commenced into Maguire. On murder case, conflict continued in France for a second night as security forces deployed in their thousands to control protests over the killing of a 17-year-old boy who was identified as Nahel Nater by police, which French President Emmanuel Macron described as inexcusable while pleading for calm as justice took its course. On Wednesday, nearly 2,000 riot police were called up in suburbs around Paris nights following the fatal point-blank range shooting on Tuesday morning of the teenager during a traffic check in the Paris suburb of Nanterre. Protesters set fire to rubbish bins and fireworks were set off in Nanterre on Wednesday night, as well as in other communes of the Hauts-de-Seine region to the west of Paris, in the eastern city of Dijon. In the Essen region to the south of the capital, a group of people set a bus on fire after having all the passengers get off, according to police. In the southern city of Toulouse, many cars were set ablaze and responding police and firefighters were bombarded with projectiles as thick black smoke rose high into the sky, a police source said. About 16 people were detained across the country, police said shortly after midnight yesterday. Anger over the killing spawned unrest in numerous towns around Paris in Tuesday night. Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin said 31 people were arrested, 24 police officers injured and 40 cars burned overnight on Tuesday and into the early hours of Wednesday. French celebrities, including star footballer Kylian Mbappe, expressed outrage and grief at the death of the teenager, while the government issued sporadic criticism of the security forces in a bid to cool tempers. On Russia and Ukraine war, relations between China and Russia will remain strong even after the failed mutiny by the Wagner Group last weekend, but analysts say Beijing is expected to become increasingly careful about Russian leader Vladimir Putin and the future stability of his government. Beijing, like many governments, remained largely silent on Saturday as Yevgeny Prigozhin's mercenary troops marched towards Moscow after seizing the southern Russian city of Rostov-on-Don. China released a statement the following day as the dust settled and Prigozhin agreed to exile in Belarus. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs called the incident Russia's internal affair and said it supported Russia's attempts at maintaining national stability and achieving development and prosperity. State media, which spent little time on Saturday's events, also picked up on the theme of stability, noting the speedy resolution to the crisis by Putin's government. However, despite the public messaging downplaying the weekend's events, the mutiny perhaps did unnerve top Chinese officials, including President Xi Jinping, said Elizabeth Wishning, a senior research scientist at Columbia University's Weatherhead East Asian Institute. Xi, who has established strong ties with Putin in recent years, is in the midst of extending his role into a personal grip over China as the most powerful leader since Mao Zedong. For a government that stresses on stability at all costs, even locking down tens of millions for COVID-19 and overturning the economy to achieve it, a situation such as that faced by Putin as the Wagner Group advanced on Moscow will have been Xi's worst nightmare. Shen Dingley, a Shanghai-based international relations scholar, said, "I think China will become more cautious in understanding that Mr. Putin's control of his country may not be as solid as people used to think. The perception that he is a strong man in command of his country now has been cracked. That will be calculated into the decisions of all players, not only China, but Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Germany, the US," he said. Even Putin himself, he knows his image has been tarnished. Russian authorities have reportedly arrested General Sergei Surovikin, the deputy commander of Russia's military operations in Ukraine, amidst a reported expulsion of military officials following the short-lived rebellion by Wagner mercenary forces, according to report. Surovikin, nicknamed General Armageddon by the Russian media for his reputed ruthlessness, is a veteran of Russia's wars in Chechnya and Syria, who has been decorated by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Citing two sources close to Russia's defense ministry, reports from Russia on Wednesday said Surovikin was detained due to what one of the unnamed sources said was choosing Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin's side during the uprising. A Russian military blogger, Vladimir Romanov, also reported Surovikin's arrest on Wednesday that while the Washington, D.C.-based think tank Institute for the Study of War, ISW, reported another Russian source as claiming that military affiliates of Surovikin had been accused of complicity in the rebellion. Russia's defense ministry has yet to comment on the reports of Surovikin's detention, reports said. On Wednesday, the ISW reported that a prominent Russian military blogging site had claimed that a large-scale purge of the Russian military command was underway following the attempt by the Wagner forces to enter Moscow and apprehend the country's senior military leaders. Russia's Ministry of Defense is undergoing what Rybar, a pro-Kremlin military analyst, described as a crash test for loyalty amid apparent indecisiveness by some in the Russian military command when it came to crushing the Wagner immunity and their support for the private mercenary force, the ISW reported. Rybar said the uprising by the Wagner force had become a pretext for a massive purge in the ranks of the Russian armed forces. In politics again, the Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands has called for a review of his nation's security treaty with Australia amidst rising strategic competition in the Pacific region between China, the United States and its allies. On Wednesday, Manasseh Sugavure made the statement following a meeting with the Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles in Honiara, according to the Prime Minister's office. Marles is on a 2-day visit to the Solomon Islands for security meetings that come days ahead of a visit by Sugavure to China. Australia is a significant aid donor and has a decades-long security relationship with the Solomon Islands. Canberra deployed troops to the Solomon Islands in 2021 at Honiara's request following anti-government protests alongside defense personnel from Fiji and New Zealand. The deployment was part of a 2017 security treaty between Australia and the Solomon Islands, which enables Australian police and defense personnel to deploy promptly to the Solomon Islands if the need arises, and both countries consent. Sugavure's office said he had conveyed the country's appreciation to Australia's ongoing support in the area of security in his meeting with Marles. The Prime Minister expressed the need to review the current security treaty between the two countries to take into account the changing security challenges faced by both countries, the statement said. Miles wrote on Twitter that he had a productive meeting with Sogavero discussing the deepening partnership between our two countries, including through regional security, infrastructure, labor, mobility, and health. He also met members of the Solomon Islands International Assistance Force, SIAF. His visit comes amidst rising fears in Australia, New Zealand, and the US about Beijing's ambitions in the strategically located region. Sogavero signed a security pact with China last year, while Chinese police have taken an increasing role in training and equipping the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force in recent months. The Solomon Islands is hosting the Pacific Games in Honiara in November, and China has funded the regional sporting events and built 7 stadiums on other venues. Chinese police have pledged to continuously support the Solomon Islands police throughout and after the event. Sogavero's office said assessments were ongoing to determine security needs during the games, adding that Australia will be notified through appropriate channels should there be areas to address. The Prime Minister is anticipated to travel to China next week, he told Parliament on Monday. More story says man arrested for directing Russian missile attack. Ukraine has arrested a man accused of directing the Russian missiles that hit a restaurant in the country's city of Kramatorsk, killing at least 12 people and wounding more than 60, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and security officials had said. 2 sisters, both aged 14, were among 3 teenagers killed in the attack on Tuesday evening that hit the Ria Pizza restaurant in the city center, which was popular with locals, soldiers, aid workers, and journalists. The other teenager killed was 17, according to Prosecutor General Andriy Kostin. Ukrainian security officials said the man it arrested, an employee of a fuel transportation company, was suspected of filming the restaurant for Russian forces and informing them about its popularity. The security service of Ukraine, together with the police special forces, detained the person who coordinated this terrorist attack, Zelensky said in his nightly address to the nation on Wednesday. Everyone who helps Russian terrorists destroy life deserves the maximum punishment, and this applies not only to some collaborators, he said. The spotter is being charged with treason. The possible punishment is life imprisonment. Accomplices of a terrorist state must be treated as betrayers of humanity, he added, warning that more bodies may yet be found beneath the rubble in the restaurant. Officials initially said Tuesday's attack on the restaurant involved a Russian S-300 missile, a surface-to-air weapon that Moscow's forces have repurposed for loosely targeted attacks on cities, but Ukraine's national police later said Iskander short-range ballistic missiles were used. Kramatorsk is a frontline city that houses the Ukrainian Army's regional headquarters. The death toll from the attack rose to 12 on Thursday following the discovery of another body, Ukraine's emergency services said, as rescuers continued to search through rubble for possible survivors in a city where last year, about 6 weeks after the start of Moscow's full-scale invasion, 52 civilians were killed in a Russian missile attack on a train station. Tuesday's missile attack also damaged 18 multi-story buildings, 65 houses, 5 schools, 2 kindergartens, a shopping center, an administrative building, and a recreational building, Ukraine's Donetsk regional governor Pavlo Krylenko said. Now 2 dead at U.S. consulate shooting in Jeddah. A shooting outside the United States consulate in the port city of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, has left 2 people dead, a near police security guard and the gunman who initially opened fire. Officials in the U.S. and Saudi Arabia confirmed the incident on Wednesday as investigations continue into the attack. A person in a car stopped near the American consulate building in Jeddah Governorate and go out of carrying a firearm in his hand, a spokesperson for the Mecca region police had said. So security authorities took the initiative to deal with him as required, and the exchange of fire resulted in his death. The Saudi Arabia, according to reports, said the security guard who was part of the consulate's private security was shot dead. No U.S. citizens were injured in the gunfire, the U.S. State Department said afterwards, but it added the U.S. Embassy and consulate remain in contact with Saudi authorities as they investigate the incident. The U.S. consulate in the Red City port city, home to more than 4.7 million people, has been a target of violence before, including in 2016. In African scenes, ex-Kenyan Facebook moderator seeks justice. Now Nathan Nkuzimana is among closely 200 ex-employees suing Facebook and the local contractor Sama over working conditions in Kenya that could have implications for social media moderators around the world. On the verge of tears, Nkuzimana remembered watching a video of a child being molested and another of a woman being killed. 8 hours a day, his job as a content moderator for a Facebook contractor needs him to look at horrors that the world wouldn't have to. Some overwhelmed colleagues will have scream or cry, he said. This is the first known court challenge outside the United States, where Facebook settled with moderators in 2020. The group was employed at the social media giant's outsourced hub for the content moderation in Kenya's capital of Nairobi, where workers screen posts, videos, messages, and other content from users across Africa, removing any illegal or harmful material that breaches its community standards and terms of service. The moderators from numerous African countries are seeking a $1.6 billion compensation fund after alleging poor working conditions, including insufficient mental health support and low pay. Earlier this year, they were laid off by Sama as it left the business of content moderation. They claim that the companies are disregarding a court order for their contracts to be prolonged until the case is resolved. Facebook and Sama have defended their employment practices. The moderators' lawyers are now not even sure how long it will take for the case to conclude. The moderators expressed despair as money and work permits run out as they wrestle with the dramatic images that haunt them. The 33-year-old said content moderation is like soldiers taking a bullet for the Facebook users, with workers watching harmful content on murders, suicides, and sexual assaults and making sure it is taken down. But as the exposure to alarming content reignited past traumas for some like him who had fled political or ethnic violence back home, the moderators found little support and a culture of secrecy. They were asked to sign non-disclosure agreements. Let me take a quick break, and when I come back, I'll bring you more stories, especially from Nigeria. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Yesterday, Tinubu says Nigeria will experience peace and stability. Yesterday in Lagos at the Eid prayer ground, President Bola Tinubu promised that on his watch, the country will experience peace, stability, and prosperity. Tinubu appealed to the citizens to have faith in God. According to reports, after observing the Eid al-Kabir prayers at Dodan Barracks prayer ground in Obalande, Lagos State, the president, through a release by his special advisor on special duties, communication, and strategy, Mr. Dele Aleke, prayed for victory of Nigerian troops in battle against insurgency. The president stressed the need for unity and cooperation, and he appealed to Nigerians to eschew ethnic and religious rivalries. On his part, Senator Kashim Shettima, the vice president, vowed that the government will address the country's infrastructure deficits. At the same time, Lagos State Deputy Governor Obafemi Hamzat, who spoke on behalf of his principal, Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu, urged the people to unite behind Tinubu in his determination to make the country even better. Former President of the Senate, Dr. Bukola Saraki, the new Chief of Army Staff, Major General Turid Lagbaja, Labour Party LP presidential candidate Peter Obi, and governors, among others, facilitated with Muslims across the country for another successful Salah celebration. The president also prayed for Nigerian security forces in the front line in the fight against insurgency, saying it is his earnest desire and that of the country that they emerge victorious. The prayer was attended by Chief of Staff to the President, Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila, National Security Advisor Malam Nuhu Ribadu, and former Governor of Lagos State and immediate past Minister of Works and Housing, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, who turned 60 yesterday. Others were Speaker of the State House of Assembly, Honorable Mudashiru Obasa, and a former Nigerian High Commissioner to Ghana, Senator Misliu Obanikoro, among other top government officials and politicians. Meanwhile, Tinubu will today pay courtesy visit to 3 first-class traditional rulers in Ogun State. Vice President Kashim Shettima assured the people that the President Bola Tinubu administration will give quick attention to tackling the country's infrastructure deficit. On Wednesday, Shettima made the pledge while paying Salah homage to the Shehu of Borno, His Royal Highness Abubakar Ibn Garbai, El Kanemi in Maiduguri, he expressed hope that the infrastructure challenges in the country, including construction of the Gamboru, Ngala, Ndikwa, and well as Damboa roads in Borno State, will also be addressed. And finally on the news, the Central Bank of Nigeria limits daily contactless payment to 50,000 naira. The Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has released fresh procedures for contactless payments in the country, limiting the daily cumulative transaction limit via the channel to 50,000 naira and single transactions limit to 15,000 naira. This was contained in a circular signed by Musa Jimo, the Central Bank of Nigeria Director Payments and Systems Management Department, to all banks, financial institutions and payment service providers issued yesterday. According to the circular, higher value contactless payments which exceed the limits shall require appropriate verification authorization. For these transactions, existing KYC requirements and limits on the electronic payment channels shall apply. Limits above the stipulated daily cumulative limit shall be conducted using contact-based technology. The guideline stated that banks should determine appropriate transaction and daily cumulative limits for contactless payments from time to time. Stakeholders shall be permitted to set limits in line with banks' limits. Contactless payment transactions below stipulated limits per transaction per day may not require customers' authorizations such as personal identification number, PIN, token, biometrics, etc. Higher value contactless payments shall require customer verification such as PIN, mobile code, biometric identifier, etc. The Apex Bank noted that it had released the guidelines in continuance of its mandate to make sure the safety and stability of the Nigerian financial system, endorse a resilient and stable payment system. The CBN, pursuant to the provisions of Section 2, subsection D of the CBN Act 2007, and its power to make regulations for banks and other financial institutions entrenched in Section 56, subsection 2 of the Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act BOFAI 2020 hereby issues these guidelines for contactless payments in Nigeria. Contactless technology permits an alternative payment method whereby payment instruments are used without physical contact with devices. Contactless technology in payments provides easy, convenient, and efficient cashless options for users. Examples of contactless payment instruments include prepaid, debit, and credit cards, stickers, fobs, wearable devices, tokens, and mobile electronic devices. Contactless-enabled payment terminals interact with contactless payment devices to facilitate payments. A recap of major stories says China connected to Australia's corruption case. In France, protests trail killing of 17-year-old. China-Russia ties still strong after Wagner revolt. And report says General Surovikin blamed for Wagner mutiny on Solomon Islands seeks security reform. That's all in the news. Thanks for watching. I am Lois Tureki.